Welcome back to another episode of The Architecture of Health. I'm Deb Voisin, and my guest this week is Marlo Fisken, a movement educator specializing in flow, a pole dancing problem solver, and a wiggle advocate. Thanks for coming, Marlo.
Thank you so much for having me.
And I share each week how I met my guests and why I invited them. And I was in this online workshop about nonlinear ways of moving when there was one person in an exercise context. How do you take something simple like a push-up and make it even more nourishing? And there was one person dialing in the dark. And then I researched her time zone and it was something like 4 a.m. So I had to know more about why she was so passionate about these different ways of thinking about moving. And then I found out she's world-renowned expert in nonlinear movement and has helped many people with their pole dancing practices. So it's a real pleasure to have such a leader in the field, besides your delightful Instagram posts where you're doing strange things in airports and gyms. It's really beautiful to watch. So can you start by sharing, how did you get this mindset that's different than the way most people think about movement, that at least I've encountered in mainstream fitness, even mainstream dance?
Yeah, and it's hard to put any sort of finger on a start point because it's just how it's always been. I think I never stopped doing a lot of things that people stopped doing. Like I never stopped twirling, even though I, went into dance education as a child and learned techniques that teach very like vertical axes of spinning. I also just kind of wanted to twirl and throw myself around, even though that wasn't part of the dance approaches that I was learning at the time. Even squatting. And when I was a kid, and even through a teenager, I would squat on the chair at dinner, and my mom would say to me, "If you dined with the queen, would you sit like that?" And I was like, "Well, I'm probably not going to dine with the queen, so this isn't even really up for conversation." But I ate in a squat always. And then, and so there's many examples like that. And even though I pursued a career in the fitness industry, by the time I was 18, I knew I wanted to find some sort of merge between the expressiveness and the artistry and rhythm of dance and the group fitness environment that people are used to. So I got my certification to be a trainer when I was 18 years old. And, but I never stopped wanting to bring the essence of dance into the world of fitness. And so it's just kind of always been there. I've been.
Wow, I would love to build off of that
Yeah.
realization, because
Yeah.
what I've noticed is some people like myself interrupted our natural movement patterns from crawling and rolling around on the floor as babies and having a real sense of ground and barefoot climbing trees to an interruption. And they also call it the third grade slump, which is when kids start sitting in chairs for more and more hours of the day. Often there's a shift in their baseline posture. And I see, as I call myself late bloomer mover, because I'm reclaiming part of me that accepted limitations and adopted a sedentary lifestyle now. And it's through these nonlinear, playful, nonlinear ways that all sorts of possibilities are open. Even in the most linear looking movement, the body is already, like you said, it's already always there. It's just a matter of often a reminder. So what
Yeah.
is it that, so tell me more. You never stopped twirling and squatting. Oh my God, you kept squatting. How
Yeah.
did you know? How
Yeah.
did you know? You have a lot of courage to
Just,
keep doing that. And that, like, that's a lifelong skill.
yeah.
And at the same time, someone who hasn't been squatting a lot of their life suddenly starting to go to end range can cause ligament laxity if they're just suddenly declare. So you've had this
Yeah.
gradual ramp and you've kept going. Um, so you've also talked about the environmental influences that you've encountered. You also travel a lot as you teach around the world. So tell me more about what you've learned about the way the environment invites you to move, and what other kind of diagrams you have drawn about
Yeah.
understanding how to teach movement.
Well, before I go into some of my personal takes on this, I go to the figure that I've read around within Americans and Europeans. By the time somebody is 80, they would have spent 72 years of their life indoors. So most people are spending, what is it? It's like if you're 40, it's about 36 years of your life that you've spent indoors. I mean, it's a huge part, 90% and up for many people in most seasons. Not everyone, of course, but that's like the average in America and Europe. And so, okay, we're really, really shaped by our inside environments. We are shaped by the cues that we receive from the outside world, because if most all decisions we make are guided by the subconscious, the environments that we are embedded in are going to be driving our choices, our movement choices, and just the ways that we're from the most minute things, the way we're calibrating our balance because of a surface on, the way that we're organizing in order to just move through space day to day. And of course, then, how we feel as it relates to light and sound and so forth. So I'm very interested in the ways that spaces cue our movement. And I could also just say it as like the way that the places we are, how they remind us to be and how they encourage us to be. So there's the more structural aspect of that, but then there's also the culture that has its residues in a place. So that might be if you're somewhere with other people, there are people upholding a standard around a way of being, but often even when there's no one else there, there's still this, the residue of what the expectations and behaviors are around how to behave in a space. And huge amount of that heritage is really damaging for people's well-being, and movement inhibiting, movement limiting, expression limiting, which ultimately is limiting people's well-being. So I am always wondering, what is the culture of movement in this space? Some of this is structural, some of this is influenced by light, dimension, color, but also a lot of it is what we've the meaning we're assigning to the spaces that we're in, and how we encourage or inhibit others to
Yes.
be.
And there's so much that's so rich. The first thing you talked about is how our environment invites us to behave. In architecture and in user interface design, the word is an affordance. Like the handle on a door is an affordance. And yet we're surrounded by a world where mostly when you're supposed to push a door, they have these handles that suggest you pull. And that's a design decision that has been made to frustrate human beings on almost every moment they enter and exit a building. So then they have to put a sign that says pull, pull. And yet the affordance, our bodies override even the intellectual sign. So what you're talking about here is is you take this fractal of the power of an invitation that's a physical invitation. And if we work around that fractal, but in a regenerative, inviting way, like I see the room you're in has plenty of space. There's a pole. You're sitting on a ball. That's inviting your body to move. I moved into a freezing cold warehouse to move. It's honestly one affordance I need is warmth. It's not warm enough for me to want to move very much. But okay, let's start there though. In your personal, but you're in many movement spaces. You make everywhere you go a movement space. I see you at the airport. I see you at the standing on the corner waiting for a bus or something, climbing on a statue. I see you at the gym doing your nonlinear training, no matter what people around you are doing. And that suggests then that cultural patterning as well. What gives you the courage to keep leading a cultural mindset change? I find because I like attention, I crave attention. I love going to the gym. I don't care who looks at me, but I know a lot of the people I work with don't have that performer kind of instinct.
Well, I will say that, I capture things and put them on social media because my work necessitates it. but I don't do the things that I do because I want people to see it.
Right.
And I imagine that could be a common assumption. I haven't even gotten that from things that sometimes get a lot of reach and go into worlds of people who don't understand me. They see what I do and they're like, ah, a cry for attention. I can feel cravings for movement in the way that someone feels cravings for food. And maybe somebody who's become more of an intuitive eater can even sense like, I need more of this macro, or even like starting to know exactly what vegetable is really needed. And they can sense like, this is something that's missing and this is what I need. I have a really strong sense of my craving for movement. I know like what my nervous system state is, and I am in touch with what I can do to state shift if I'd like to do that. And so a lot of these things are really me not suppressing an urge, you know, and so
And I would
some of
say,
it is just like being okay, trying to be okay in the world is me wiggling.
well, and I think the first level is that you identified, we're not necessarily in any environments that invite us to respect that craving, or around people that we may not be around people that encourage that craving. Like you're saying, I agree that sometimes I'll do something and I have to post it as a leader in a cultural shift. I'm not doing
Mm-hmm.
it because it's my name or or who I am. It's that I'm sharing the possibility of turning this boat around, of fixing that handle on the door instead of accepting that I'm always going to struggle. So what about, well, so one thing is your personal home environment. Can you tell me a little bit about some simple change that you made somewhere along the way to keep inviting yourself to, when you're indoors, to keep moving?
Yeah. It's a combination of, I'll say, strategic discomfort. Like I don't have anything that I would actually call comfortable. You know, I don't have anything that when I like lay on it or sit on it, I go, relief. I don't own it. And part of that's just because I'm also like my mom's caretaker and I'm dealing with what she has there, but it certainly keeps me moving. It keeps me position changing because nothing is actually allows me to get that relaxed. I lay on the floor and I'll say that is relaxing, but I'm on like the hard surface. And so I'm pretty bony. I can't stay in the same position for a really long time and feel okay. You know, I can get at ease. I can relax, but there's going to be a position change. My body will call for a position change. So that's one thing. And I actually, plenty of people do things with multi-level workstations. I do, I'm on the leaning on this thing. I'm on my belly. I'm in my squat seat. I'm on my seat. I'm on my standing seat. But that's kind of, you can get that insight anywhere. What I do that really helps is I keep calibrating my sound environment. I will choose the sort of rhythms and frequencies of sound that I have on in order to either bring me into like deep work or to keep me moving. So sometimes I am working with soca music on and really like vigorously moving because it's okay. I actually do a lot of my work with voice. I use verbal transcription because I've had a lot of hand and wrist issues from holding the phone and from typing. And I realized too, because I'm not a very fast typer, like I can think way faster than I can type, and that the churn in the gap between the timing, it will actually interfere with my flow of thought. So I do a lot of verbal transcribing, which allows me to, now I don't even have to be right at the computer. I just, I set a keyboard function, control, I step away and I'm writing things, and I sometimes know all I need to do, I need to ramble in order to get this free. We know that we think better when we are moving. We know that, plenty of research around that, especially you want creative thought, move your body and then do the thing. So that frees up my hands from, and this posture. Some of my biggest injuries in the past years have been because I'm so tied to devices. Ironically, people look at what I do and they go, "Oh, it must be dangerous." I'm like, not as dangerous as working on the computer. That's far more dangerous.
Let's stay right here. There's so much. Okay, yes, devices, especially this is like holding a mini barbell. We're holding it on one side, and then we're amplifying the existing asymmetries that the body has because our organs are heavier on the right side. Then the opposite side has to tense up, and it's and I love this suggestion to really own our relationship. Take charge of the possibilities and opportunities. We're already engaging. Find a new way to transform that into a plus. I found recently, since when I worked in Silicon Valley, for many years I drove 3 hours a day, and that's my deepest, darkest, winding hip imbalance. And when I learned how to use neurological and breath repatterning to undo that wind while I was driving, in 30 minutes, I made changes in my body with that neurological repatterning that had defied every exercise I knew for years. So owning what's actually happening, we are actually currently indoors 80% or 90% of our lives. Let's own that. And I love that you said it's strategic discomfort. At the same time, when I went to West Africa several times, because of the movement culture, to really see a squat culture that does everything squatting, everything's walking, carrying large loads in beautiful grace. Well, I started to do that once I was a yoga teacher who had injured myself and learned that the world's best movers don't stretch or do any kind of exercise or any yoga. It blew my mind that there's a way of being in everyday life that could be nourishing and beautiful. So the interesting thing is, there I was as a tourist on my little grass mattress, my hay mattress they had killed themselves to get for us in these cement rooms. Oh, I can't sleep, and it's 104 degrees. I can't. And there, midday at the peak of the day, would be I saw a pile of like 18 to 25-year-old men tangled up together on a cement floor in blazing heat, in bizarre positions, just dead asleep. So my whole understanding of that the body we could use our pads and softness and be comfortable with hard surfaces, and then later, as you mentioned, it's inviting you to move when you're not fully comfortable. You can both get fully comfortable with these hard surfaces, and especially sleeping, we're supposed to be moving on average 49 times a night. This idea that you're supposed to put yourself in this casket and get the perfect neck position and the perfect, that's got to go. We're not so fragile. So devices. I also heard you post recently, like you were warning your crowd, like, hey guys, all those apps on your phone are definitely not building your flow. So anything you want to say about that?
Yeah, I suppose so. Many people pay attention to my work or come to learn from me, at least partly because they want to be more fluid when they move. They want to move in a way that like feels natural, is easeful, and at least the aesthetic, is continuity and curvatures of waves and spirals and so forth. And that is there within everybody, within our inner spaces. There are constant undulations and coils. Even if we look at anyone, even somebody who's not moving all that well, their daily movement, there are these little waves. There are always these like little waves and torsions that if we start to sense them, then you realize like, wow, we're all actually, there are undulations happening within everybody. So I help people start to notice what's already there in their movement, and then we can choose to amplify it instead of acting like humans are waveless beings and you must learn a body wave forward into the sagittal plane. And there's a really awkward way that people go about learning it. I feel like I lost the track a little bit, but here's how it relates to like your phone or your apps. You have to pay deep attention to how you're moving in order to start to find like your most natural way of moving and your fluidity. which requires that you have a prolonged period of time where you're not judging yourself, you're just sensing and you're experiencing. And of course, that comes up. We are humans, but you need longer stretches of time where you really are in experiential mode. And that requires that you can focus. It requires that you can tune out noise, outside world, tune out like past and future projecting as much as possible, and be. And our anything that will distract us is at odds with that. Like there is no capital F flow state when you can't focus. It's necessary to get there. And so if somebody wants to be a more fluid mover or to transform how they move in any way, you have to be aware of what you're doing. And to get really aware of what you're doing and curious about it, you have to be able to focus on it. So that's a way that all comes together.
I love that. That's one reason I'm attracted to the realm of everyday movement is if you bring a little bit of awareness to something that you do a lot, it can have exponential benefits instead of this idea of separating that I move this way in the dance studio and I move this way in that situation. Interesting. So what it sounds like and what you're saying is since we are wavy ladies, we're wavy creatures and we can spend as much time as we want trying to flatten that out of us, but it's not going to work. We will. Mm-hmm. And in fact, I saw recently there was MIT research that saw a cell as it was beginning to form. I think it was embryo, and it shows all the shifts are these little waves. That's the way we generate. That's the way we regenerate. And there's a lot of wasted energy trying to get rid of that yielding and building those yielding and building powerful, easy recycling ways of being. So it sounds like that's probably the top kind of misperception. Those are two of the top misperceptions people have is they don't understand there's one, this just paying attention and being and not judging. Mm-hmm. And two, that it's not about flattening yourself into a shape. It's about tapping into what's already always there.
Yeah.
Are there other? Yeah.
I was gonna say with often people come to me and they're seeking a particular skill, right? And there's a gap between where they are and that skill. Of course, there's a gap. That's why they're seeking help. If there wasn't a gap, then people would know what to do. Usually, that might feel, I don't know what to do to get from here to here. And my favorite, and I suppose one of the methods that I really have the most faith in at this moment is for me to see the thing that they are already doing that is the step towards that. Because if I can start someone's learning journey with what they already are doing and what is already working, we're able to really like ride a wave of progress instead of trying to shove an entire lived experience into a template. It's not what works, but this is the beauty of if somebody wants to learn spinal waves, I have them start with a step back and forth, use an aspect of, I can use a gait to teach anything anyone wants to learn that I have the foundation to share. Doesn't matter if it's like cartwheels or climbing the pole, spins around the pole. One of the reasons that people don't spin very well is they don't know how to push back with their foot as they walk. And so that doesn't propel you forwards in a way that will create horizontal spin. So, you can bring it, Ben, and everybody, that is coming to my classes has walked before at this point.
Yes.
I would love to also help serve people that have not walked before, but that's usually who I'm working with, and we'll start with whatever's familiar. Yeah.
And I've been studying the last couple of years with people who put everything through the lens of gait because everybody already does it. And you can start to see the possibilities, like you said, for more propulsion, more pushing off of the back leg. And it's kind of a mindset as well, this idea of moving forward. I found myself gravitating towards very monodimensional things, like flattening myself in the way I was rib flaring to be seen. or picking movements or stretches that I was doing in one place and had no idea I had trained out my deepest deepest core power to explosively propel forward. Because and part of that is I didn't know how to tap into these beautiful waves that could just carry you forward. So yes, for me now also because I injured my hip so severely overstretching that I have had to go back to their design. Their 80% design was moving forward through space, and so I'm going back to that. But I have to say, I see the intelligence of pole dancing. I see that you have to use a certain tone and clarity in the curved tensioned form to get authentic movement. And it, yeah, can you tell me a little bit about why you've chosen that as your most obvious art form?
um, the first time I tried it, which was just following curiosity, someone mentioned they did it, and I was like, must try. I just knew that there was still so much that could be explored with it at the time. And I knew that I could apply anything that I'm curious about to the pole. You know, it's just another axis to move on with and around. And it certainly will wake you up to a desire for capacities that maybe you didn't know you wanted before. I grew up dancing, not in gymnastics, and so when I started pole dancing, I could not even bend my arms to do a pull up or chin up. I didn't have the. I grew up dancing. You know, I didn't hang from my arms at all until I started pole dancing. In fact, I didn't hang from my arms because I felt bad at it, and that's a common story. Like somebody feels like they suck at something, and so we don't do it. And then I started pole, and suddenly, priorities shifted. I was like, I not only do I really enjoy this, I want to be one of the best in the world, and I knew that at the time, and so I'll say my athleticism really shifted and broadened and it took me up and upside down and all around. But it definitely but I want to not generalize pole as being any one thing, because often people look at it and they say, wow, you have to be so strong for that. And I think that perspective is pretty limited, because it's seeing that the things that one does or should do with a pole require that, when it's not true at all. There are so many ways that we can move with a pole that are pretty gentle in terms of upper body demands. No, you're not going to be swinging around it and climbing it and doing wild acrobatics, but there's also it's a post. You can do anything. You can play with the relationality of it. I can move in circles around it. I don't have to be tethered to it at flinging. So there's a lot of ways that one can move, but certainly when people want to pursue these the tricks and skills, it does ask for quite a bit of strength and range, many of the skills.
I would say it asks for a lot of integrated strength. That and one thing in my recovery journeys through various injuries, I've had to let go of a lot of muscle that was designed for activities that were interfering with my ability to really have enough release to get the right tension to keep moving forward. And some areas that were way under tensioned and some that were over. And, I had a linear mindset about chin ups and such versus how much easier things on a spiraling diagonal turn out being. They require, when you use the weight of your body and ride the weight of your body, you get an uplift that's free.
Mm-hmm.
And I find that a lot when I teach West African dance. I'm attracted to it because it really uses ground reaction force to bounce you back out of the ground. And almost all beginners are holding their arms when that's That's the bounce. That's the stored mass that lets it become a joyful ride. So no, I'm not,
Yeah.
and the kind of strength. What I love about pole dancing too is it's not like some cardio. It's strength training is so important, and strength training from many angles has unique protective benefits to many joints in the body that I'm attracted to it for the exact opposite reasons I imagine some people will be attracted to it. But you also teach floor flow.
Yeah,
Which, can you tell me how that evolved?
yeah. Well, I've always loved being on the floor, as well. Just I feel happy getting to roll about and be low and be in contact with the ground. And I think some of that is maybe the disorientation compared to the rest of us moving through life vertically bipedally. You're like, I'm facing down, I'm facing up, I'm rolling over. It has a sort of a trancing that can happen when you're really starting to navigate on the floor, the perspective shifts that happen seeing the ground up close. So when I think back to liking it when I was young, I was just like, I'm seeing the ground up close, and a shift in perspective, which is also what pole offers, which makes
Mm.
it particularly captivating. Optic flow is what you experience when you're running through space and you see the environment moving past. And there's been some interesting research around like the role of optic flow in mental health and in like working against depression, versus if you're moving in a space and you're looking at the same things versus actually seeing the environment pass you. So I when you're turning and twirling, there's something relevant happening here. Like you're seeing this happen to space, and it really is sort of the blender effect, is what I'll call it. But I do, yeah, I find it like joy provoking and trance provoking, even if it's just dipping yourself in for a moment to something that's really brings you into your now. Quite simply.
There are so many things there. One is their relationship to the ground. And in modern culture, a lot of babies are being kept off the
Yeah.
ground and strapped in car seats. And it's becoming a huge epidemic of teenage back pain that never existed in human history, at least in, American and European culture, American even more so with the amount of driving. But the other thing I learned about fascination with floor, besides it kind of taking us back to being able to develop those innate relationships to gravity and remind ourselves of those. One other thing is because the body can make the biggest transformations when it's in a relaxed state.
Mm-hmm.
And if you take the fear of falling out of the picture, then there's more of a chance to integrate the breath and the neck. And since I've been studying so much gait retraining, it's actually much harder retraining walking when you're right side up. It's actually much better to have poles or walls or something. No wonder ballet classes have a bar. You can't get the deep reintegration when there's this fear getting in the way. Um, and then the trance. You said it's a trance. That's one reason I do Haitian, Afro Haitian dance. Is the undulations on the sagittal plane are the most. They've been used the longest that I know of to induce
Yeah.
trance, and that's the same in a healthy sprint or when a gait cycle has been restored. It regularly they use that in Vodun
Mm-hmm.
cultures and other places to create trance states where we're at one with everything. Yeah. So tell me more about this repatterning when people come to you. Because you've worked with so many people. Tell me some other patterns,
Yeah.
because that was also one of the main things when I studied architecture. Is it's not a case by case building by building. It's these larger level fractals and patterns that just keep repeating
Yeah.
themselves. Can you tell me something else that after you've seen thousands and thousands of bodies helping nudge them along in their movement adventure?
Yeah. My the work that I do with people is usually the really more ex- expanded view type of work rather than zeroing in on, let's say, oh, we are noticing that this knee is going over here. What are some of the things? That's not, even though it's a place that I study, it's not actually where I end up doing the work with people. And I find what I end up doing is looking for how can I create the scenario for this person, the constraints that will teach this lesson in a way that's really sticks. And what are some of those things that I find myself needing to teach, bringing it back to your question. um I mean, one is the undoing the damage of learning movement from static starts and from symmetrical starts. So what I mean by that, and I'll go first to a pole dance example. When people are learning to like go upside down, they're often told to like stand still, hold these things, make yourself tight, now go. That is a strategy among strategies. That is not the strategy that is most aligned with how humans are designed to move, by using elastic recoil and properties that involve a preparatory action in order to move. And some people, there's a really common notion, maybe through the sort of like rehabilitative, mechanistic, fitnessy stance, that like we must make people still so that they don't make any erroneous motion. But we can work with momentum. We can work with people really clarifying the trajectories that they're moving on. So what I find myself asking people is, they do something, and let's say it doesn't go according to what we want it to happen. And I'm like, at what point did you lose awareness? And I'll find that people are usually lose their sense of what they're doing right before something goes wrong. And so I then create opportunities for people to play with small momentum, but making it clear, precise. Now, this is still like leaving room for variability, because that's really an important part of learning movement. But when we take away the fully integrated from the ground through the whole body web in order to learn an action, you're learning something that's not very useful in the context of flow and dance. There's a huge gap between like a static learning of a skill and how you would ever put it into moving through life, moving through your dance. And so I find I have to undo that often. I have people do exercises where we pick 3 tricks or 3 positions, and I have them move between them. And I watch again and again as people interrupt their flow because they want to hit, let's say, if they identify they're going to do a down dog, the down dog that's been drilled into them as a symmetrical thing. And so when you're like, oh, when I'm in this position, it should be this, you're just like wiping out possibility after possibility for having more variability, which is really important, not just for your movement longevity, but also for like long-term cognitive health, is pattern breaking. So
much here. So much here. It was shocking to me to learn to look at a practice, for example, yoga, as one of the most valuable things about, besides people coming together to pay attention to themselves, that the most useful movements in a yoga class are getting down to the mat, moving between the positions, rolling up their mat, going and getting the blanket, these interstitials between these positions. And what you're saying is that mindset exists where it's all on, like, the quote positive, which is they've defined this position as the goal, and that edits out some of the most optimal, that reduces the optimization of moving between those sort of still pictures in the head. And asymmetry, we are asymmetrical by design. And what's funny is 90% of us all have a certain asymmetry, a baseline postural asymmetry. And yet people almost every day come and like, oh yeah, my chiropractor told me, because I'm more on the pain side in the way I'm working with people right now. Oh, my chiropractor told me this leg is short and this is long. And I'd be like, yes, you're human.
Yeah.
What's new? Let's get at this. Let's not get scared. Let's start to decide how we're winding in and out of that. And like you said, shuttling through small movements to get this idea of regeneration, those micro movements are the last thing in the world I would have wanted to study until I learned that we do them millions of times a day. These micro movements, these micro undulations, we're breathing 20,000 times a day. And when I learned that I had sort of blown myself out trying to run a certain way, or and then I started to focus on these little mini like flicks at the center, these powerhouses that started to generate much more movement. It reminds me, I know that one of the creators of Contact Improv recently died, Steve Paxton. I was lucky, 30 years ago to have a week-long workshop with him. And he kept telling us the small dance. He was almost begging the small dance. And at the time I was like, I'd been doing martial arts and contact improv. And I was like, the big dance. And of course I tore my psoas by the end of that, doing too much aggressive lifting and jumping and flowing. And finally, you said symmetrical versus asymmetry. The inverse, and fortunately all the people I've been working with, we almost only do asymmetrical positions. When we do train a position in terms of breath and reach and remodeling, it's always a part of the gait cycle that's asymmetrical. At the same time, what happens is a lot of us sitting here, like I mentioned with the phone, when we are somewhat still, symmetry is very useful. And what's happening is people are getting asymmetrical sitting, and then they go walk and they're trying to walk symmetrically, this inversion of the waves. And they both have a place, but often it's so much easier when someone just points out, Deb, lift that thing, more of your weight on one leg. The spine can do so much. So
well, I think we could,
we
could use probably some more language or categorization, because sometimes people have heard me say something about asymmetry and immediate they go, but what about people's imbalances? And I'm like, I'm not talking about ignoring imbalances and just going with the least path of resistance. I'm inviting you to not feel like the positions for your exercises or for your movement should be so static or should be so balanced. One of the most common ways that warm-ups are done in the many dance worlds I've seen, and lots in the pole dance world, is stand on both legs and then do like spinal isolations. And usually at no point during that are people really working on weight shifting while moving your spine. Well, guess what? A lot of people do these warm-ups week after week, year after year, and don't feel confident moving through space. Why? Because they don't ever practice shifting their weight from one foot to the other while they do isolatory movements. So like if we want to start to bring anything that's familiar into something that we could feel is a little bit more of a dance, then getting your weight shifting, changing your stance is going to be so big for that. Unless the dance form that you want to do is one where there's a static base and you move your upper body, then it won't be a thing. And there are styles that really do that, but not as many.
And in the dance of life, walking is what we will be doing till we die. And it's a one-legged asymmetrical activity. 40% of walking is on one leg. And it's all about the weight shifting. And the more of you that's participating, those 364 joints in the spine, where I made the mistake that you're sort of talking about, where I had too black and white of a mindset, like I'm spirally, I'm crooked, I'm straight, I'm crooked. Like I went from not realizing how symmetrically I was thinking to then I ignored the importance of a certain amount of symmetry. When you think about a spring or the DNA double helix, there's an amount of symmetry that allows the spirals to have power. And I was kind of imitating these spiraling forms with collapsing things rather than working within a framework where the tension could use all of my tissues better and not end up collecting in one place. And honestly, I think that's one thing non-dancers have to learn. Non-dancers and non-athletes have to learn about this idea of really propelling from the ground and, you know, extending. Yeah, that's just my experience as a late bloomer mover, at least, is having this black and white mindset and not seeing what is intended as healthful reigns of symmetry within asymmetry. Until my hip snapped in a dance warm up again. In a bilateral 2 feet stance. I knew I shouldn't do it. I just went with the crowd. I was so tired of being the bad girl that never did what the teacher, you know, I was tired of making the teacher feel insecure. So I went with the group. So, wow, this is amazing. It's 45 minutes in. Is there any last thing you want to share with people who are thinking about editing their movement lifestyle in terms to create the most flow?
Well, let's bring it back to, this is the Architecture of Health podcast, and one of the big interests that you go into is the spaces that are designed. And I look at the framework that we're working with, and I don't even like the word framework right now because it sounds like a box. You know, it sounds like a box. So the sort of mental web, the world that you build in, your cognitive house that you're dwelling and moving in as you move is going to shape your choices. And when the language that people hear about movement, often in the form of instructional cues, is kind of building the features of that house. Like, this movement has these features or this shapes. And I see that as building some really maybe very limited boxy little structures. And when I'm playing, it feels like, you know, I go into a drawer, I burrow into a hole, or I open something up and I discover there's a really expansive world there. Or maybe I want to like push against that wall. So it's both moving within my inner space and creating these, and it's not always that imaginative, because some people we're cognitively quite different in terms of how we use the mind's eye. I'm not really seeing like a house or something as I move. I'm using these as metaphorical language, but I do sense my way into possibilities that are, you know, very beyond the normal planes of movement that people are learning to use. It's not just a sphere, it's a sphere within spheres with portals and webs, and it's geometrical and it's undulatory, but it's ultimately these are the sort of shapes that I will move into have to come from somewhere. So the we can consider the sort of like architecture of the space, not the room we're in, but the one that we're building in our kinesphere is going to cue us. So helping people be aware of the trajectories or the pathways that they already move on, and then starting to oscillate and expand those. So I'm going to just use a real world metaphor because I realize that could sound pretty out there. One is, let's say I walk down the sidewalk normally, and instead of walking in the middle of the sidewalk, I start to go to this edge, and then I start to go to this other edge. You know, I meander a little bit, or I tip off the edge of the what is it called? This edge of the sidewalk, in the curb into the street, or I'm like, some grass, that feels different. And so it's just notice the path that you're already on and go play with this. What happens when you go there? What happens when you go there? What happens if I do this familiar thing, but I do it sideways? What happens if I do this familiar thing, but I do it backwards? And we can play these constructions.
I gotta say something about this. I gotta say something, because one of the biggest revelations when I was in architecture school was they would show a sidewalk that had been made, and then the part of the grass that had been worn away that actually was environmentally responding better to the context than this linear set of rules the city had to enforce. And the funny thing is, it was the same design thinking I used in Silicon Valley. I would go into people's homes and watch them set up their router or watch them do something and see what are they already doing, and then figure out how do we make the instructions fit that, rather than this pressing out, like just take it or leave it point of view. And the funny thing is, I remember when I went to Europe and my son was 14, and I decided to teach him how to drive a stick shift out in the countryside in Italy, and all the roundabouts and all the roads and all the buildings are still built with their original reference was the flow of the shape of the land, the rivers, the angles of light. And so driving there, even though it's in a foreign country, we don't speak the language, he had never used a stick shift. Driving there eventually became easier than in the United States. Our Italian friends here laugh that in the United States there are 90-degree angles in the road because you have to come to a complete stop and you lose all your energy, versus the roundabouts and ways that drivers are just flowing more together. So I think that's a perfect way that we're coming together with these insights about valuing these organic options, and honoring that meandering is opening up a world of possibility. And one last thing on this is, I messed up my hips the worst when I switched my sometimes hour a day of hiking in the mountains to an hour or two walking on a flat cement sidewalk. All of my little asymmetries blasted. I could no longer ignore my hip asymmetries because I stopped meandering. I started driving straight in the straight lane on the straight, and people don't, and that's one of those paradoxes where it looks like the regularity of something flat is safer when it's actually inviting less of you to care for yourself. Yeah. Well, how can people find you, find more about you, your work? You have an Instagram account. Is that Marlo Fisken? I'll put it in the show notes too. But how do you want people to reach you?
My website is flowmovement.net. Yeah.
Great. And I'll put your Instagram account. Your stories are amazing. And flowmovement.net, I'll put those in the show notes. And one day I want to take one of your intro remote classes with the drip flow or whatever your next beginning.
Maybe you need a poll, Deb. You need a poll.
Because I'm always a beginner. I've got a warehouse. I can get a poll.
You can combine anything you're interested in.
Okay. Yeah. That is so true. Okay. Well, what a pleasure, Marlo. Thank you so much.